Black teens swarm old woman. She starts crying when they do this. Martha shuffled down the quiet, tree-lined street, her grocery bags weighing heavily in her hands. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the suburban neighborhood. This was the time of day Martha loved most, when everything slowed down and she could enjoy a peaceful walk back to her home. But today that peace was shattered by a growing sense of unease. She noticed out of the corner of her eye a group of 5 teenagers lingering near the corner store. They were laughing, shoving each other playfully, but something about them made her uneasy. Martha had seen these kids before. Everyone in the neighborhood had. They were known for troublemaking ways, always hanging around, causing a stir. She'd heard stories about them, shoplifting, vandalizing property, skipping school. People whispered about them, warning others to steer clear. Martha quickened her pace, her heart beating a little faster. She kept her eyes down, hoping to pass by unnoticed. But she could feel their eyes on her, could hear their voices lower as she approached. The bags in her hands seemed to grow heavier with every step, her small frame struggling to bear the load. She cursed herself for buying so much today. It had been a mistake. Welcome back to PlotTwister. Before we unravel today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're always in the loop. As she got closer, one of the teens, a tall boy with a stern expression, glanced her way. Martha's pulse quickened. She'd heard his name was Marcus, the leader of the group. He had a reputation for being tough, the kind of kid you didn't want to cross. Martha's mouth went dry. She forced herself to keep walking, her gaze fixed on the ground in front of her. Just as she passed them, she heard footsteps behind her. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed her worst fear. They were following her. Panic bubbled up in her chest. She gripped her bags tighter, her knuckles turning white. They were closing in, their footsteps growing louder. Martha's breath came in short, sharp gasps. She was too old for this, too old and too alone. Her mind raced. She couldn't outrun them, not with these heavy bags and her aching legs. She had to get home, but they were blocking her path. With nowhere to go, Martha felt a wave of dread wash over her. She was trapped. Martha's heart pounded in her chest as the teens closed in. She tried to speed up, but the weight of the groceries in her trembling legs made it impossible. She could feel them getting closer, their presence like a dark cloud looming over her. Sweat trickled down the back of her neck as she fought the rising tide of panic. She didn't want to look back again, but she couldn't help herself. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed that they were right behind her now, just a few steps away. She could see Marcus leading the group, his expression unreadable. Jamal, a stocky boy known for his quick temper, was walking beside him, his eyes fixed on her. Martha felt her stomach twist in fear. Her hands shook as she tried to maintain her composure, but it was no use. The fear was overwhelming. What were they going to do? Mug her? Harass her? The thoughts raced through her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. She was an old woman, alone and vulnerable. She didn't stand a chance against them. Suddenly, Marcus stepped forward, cutting off her path. Martha stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She was trapped. The other teens circled around her, blocking any escape. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes wide with fear. He was so close now, too close. She could see the tension in his face. The way his jaw was set, Martha felt a shiver run down her spine. Jamal moved in next, stepping even closer. Martha instinctively recoiled, her grip tightening on her bag. She felt like a cornered animal, desperate and scared. Jamal stared her down, his gaze intense and intimidating. For a moment, neither of them moved, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, without warning, Jamal reached out toward her. Martha flinched, her body trembling with fear. She wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but no sound came. Her mind went blank, overwhelmed by the terror of the moment. She was completely at their mercy, and she knew it. She could feel the tears swelling up in her eyes, her vision blurring as the fear consumed her. There was no way out. Martha felt the tears spill over, trailing down her cheeks as she stood frozen in place. The teens surrounded her, their expressions a mix of unreadable intent and something else. Couldn't quite grasp. Jamal's hand was still outstretched, and for a terrifying moment, Martha thought he might grab her belongings. Her heart pounded so loudly in her ears that it drowned out all other sounds. But then something unexpected happened. Marcus, the one who seemed to be in charge, took a step closer to Jamal and placed a hand on his shoulder. His grip was firm, almost like a silent command. Jamal hesitated, his hand still in the air, but then he slowly pulled it back, his eyes narrowing slightly. Martha noticed the shift, but it did little to calm her nerves. The situation was still far too tense, and she was far too scared. Before Martha could even process what was happening, Jamal spoke up, his voice low and edged with frustration. He accused her of being afraid of them, of judging them without knowing anything about them. His words were sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. Martha flinched at his tone, feeling the sting of his accusations, even though she hadn't spoken a word. Marcus quickly intervened, telling Jamal to calm down, but the damage was done. The air between them was thick with tension, the kind that could snap at any moment. Martha couldn't find her voice, couldn't find a way to defend herself. All she could do was stand there, tears continuing to roll down her face, her body trembling with fear and confusion. Keisha, one of the girls in the group, stepped forward then, her face softening as she looked at Martha. She seemed to sense the old woman's fear, the depth of it, and it seemed to bother her. She glanced at Marcus as if seeking permission to support, before she turned back to Martha. In a voice that was much gentler than Jamal's, Keisha asked Martha why she was so afraid of them. The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded with meaning. Martha didn't know how to respond. She was afraid that much was true. But now that they were asking, she found it hard to explain why. All she knew was that they were a group she'd been told to avoid. And now, here they were, surrounded by her. Martha's breath hitched as she tried to find the words, but all she could manage was a small choked response. She admitted that she had heard things about them, things that had made her wary. Her voice trembled with each word, barely audible, as she confessed her fear. The air hung heavy between them as Martha's trembling words faded into the silence. Keisha exchanged a glance with Marcus, her expression shifting from concern to something more resolute. She stepped closer to Martha, careful and slow, as if approaching a frightened animal. The tension in the group seemed to ease just a bit, but it was still palpable, crackling like static in the air. Marcus, who had been watching Martha intently, made the first move. Without saying a word, he reached out and gently took one of the grocery bags from her hands. The gesture was so unexpected, so out of place in the chaos of Martha's fear, that she froze, unsure of what was happening. For a brief moment, her instincts screamed at her to pull away, but something in Marcus's eyes, something steady and calm, made her pause. Keisha followed suit, taking another bag from Martha's other hand. The weight lifted from Martha's arms, but her heart was still pounding, her mind racing to catch up with this sudden shift. She had been prepared for the worst. But now she was standing here, empty-handed, with these teens who had once seemed so threatening, now holding her groceries. It didn't make sense. Jamal, who had been the most aggressive, hung back, his expression a mix of frustration and uncertainty. Martha noticed the way he clenched his fists as if fighting an internal battle, but he didn't move to take anything from her, nor did he try to stop the others. Instead, he watched, eyes narrowed, as if waiting to see how this would play out. The group began to move, and to Martha's shock, they didn't walk away with her things. Instead, they turned toward her house, which was just a few houses down. Marcus and Keisha led the way, carrying the bags as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The others followed, creating a strange procession down the quiet street. Martha hesitated, unsure if she should follow or flee, but her feet started moving almost on their own. As they walked, Martha's fear began to ebb, replaced by a confusing mix of emotions. She didn't understand why they were helping her, why they hadn't done something awful like she'd expected. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis, leaving her disoriented and unsure of what to do, or what to believe. They reached her front porch, and Martha felt a knot tighten in her throat. Marcus and Keisha gently set the bags down on the worn wooden steps, then stepping back, giving her space. The silence between them was different now, less tense but still heavy with unspoken words. Martha stood there staring at the teens who had been at the center of her fears just minutes before, trying to process what had just happened. For the first time, Marcus spoke directly to her, his voice steady and calm. He explained that they weren't what people thought they were. He said that they were just trying to make it through each day like everyone else, that they didn't want any trouble, no matter what people in the neighborhood believed. His words were simple, but they hit Martha like a wave, washing over her, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. Martha didn't know what to say. She had been so wrong, so completely certain of their intentions, and now she felt a deep shame welling up inside her. She managed a small nod, her voice barely a whisper, as she thanked them, still too overwhelmed to fully understand what had just occurred. Martha stood on her porch, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The teens had stepped back, giving her space, but they hadn't left. They lingered almost as if they were waiting for something, though she couldn't imagine what. The tension that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by a heavy silence, thick with unspoken emotions. She looked at Marcus, his face calm but serious, and something inside her broke. All the fear, the assumptions, the judgments she had made, everything came crashing down in a wave of guilt and shame. Her voice trembled as she spoke, barely able to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over again. She admitted she had been scared, that she had misjudged them based on things she'd heard, things she'd assumed were true. The words were hard to get out, but she forced herself to say them, knowing it was the right thing to do. The teens listened quietly, their expressions softening as they realized what she was saying. Keisha stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mix of understanding and sadness. She told Martha they knew what people thought of them, that they were used to the whispers, the sidelong glances, the quick judgments, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. It didn't make them feel like outsiders in their own neighborhood. Her voice was gentle, but the pain behind her words was unmistakable. Jamal, who had been so angry before, looked down at his feet, his face now somber. He mumbled something about how they were trying to do better, to stay out of trouble. But it wasn't easy when everyone expected the worst from them. His voice was rough, but there was a vulnerability there that caught Martha off guard. Marcus, still standing by, nodded in agreement with the others. He explained that they didn't want to be seen as just another group of troublemakers. They had dreams, hopes for a future beyond the streets of this neighborhood, and helping her today, even if she had been scared of them, was a way to show that they were more than what people thought. Martha felt her heart swell with emotion, the tears finally spilling over. She stepped forward and, without thinking, pulled Keisha into a hug. The gesture surprised both of them, but Keisha hugged her back, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. One by one, Martha hugged each of the teens, her tears mixing with words of gratitude and apology. As they pulled away, Martha invited them inside for a drink, her voice still shaky but warm. The teens exchanged glances, surprised by the offer, but they accepted. They followed her into the house, the tension between them replaced by a newfound understanding, a connection that none of them had expected when the day began. They sat together in Martha's small, cozy living room, sipping lemonade and talking. The conversation flowed easily now, with laughter breaking through the remnants of fear and misunderstanding. For the first time, Martha felt like she was truly seeing them, not as a group of teens with a bad reputation, but as individuals with their own stories, their own struggles, their own dreams. When the time came for them to leave, Martha walked them to the door, her heart light in a way it hadn't been in years. They promised to come by again to check in on her and maybe even help her with groceries if she needed it. She watched them walk down the street, their figures disappeared into the fading light, and smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. As she closed the door behind her, Martha realized that the fear she had carried with her for so long had lifted, replaced by something far more powerful, a sense of hope, of connection, of community. She knew that things would never be the same, but in the best possible way. She had found friends where she least expected them, and in doing so she had discovered a new way to see the world around her. What are your thoughts on the twist we uncovered today? Comment your ideas below. Make sure to like and subscribe for a daily dose of drama and mystery. See you later with another twist.